Okay, well, thank you, Governor Hickenlooper and Governor Martinez, for being here. When we thought about who we wanted to have for this panel on governing, we said we really want to make sure we have people who come from what we would call purple states, places that are not looked at as far left or far right. You've got legislatures that might not always be of your party. You've got citizens that, you know, kind of sit down the middle on a lot of issues. And you both happen to have been elected in 2011. You're both in your last year of office. So you've got some similarities there, and we'll pull that thread through our conversation today. But I want to kick off today. First, Governor Martinez, I want to talk to you about your background. You're a lawyer and a district attorney. And talk a little bit about how that experience led to your governing, and how those experiences sort of shaped and formed some of the opinions you had and the issues you wanted to work on and priorities you have had as governor.
Absolutely. I graduated 4 years of and received a criminal justice degree at UTEP, and then I went on to law school at the University of Oklahoma and went back to Las Cruces, and my first job was working as a prosecutor, a district attorney. And I specialized in the cases of physical abuse, sexual abuse of children, child homicide, rape of adults, as well as domestic violence. So that was my specialty, even though I also did gangs and drug trafficking, and supervised the unit for juvenile justice. As a lawyer, what happens is with the legislature, they write bills, they write laws, they draft laws. And then they come up to me, and so I review them to see if there are any unintended consequences, if these are things that are falling within what I had promised the people that I would try to do, and actually come through with my promises. But as a lawyer, you advocate. You are someone who will also negotiate. You are someone who reads the bills and the laws and decides whether or not this is something that is good for your state. And so a lot of and you know, you get to sit down with people from, that think a different way from you, and you debate. All of these things are things that I did for 25 years and felt that it was something that would be very helpful for me as a skill to become the governor. But I also made sure to share with the people of New Mexico what I think, or I thought at the time and still think today, would be best for New Mexico. I didn't say things for the sake of saying it and getting elected, because I really do think those are politicians. I said things that I was going to do and fight for, and it was the honest truth, which I think really defines a leader, instead of a politician that says whatever just to get elected.
Governor Hickenlooper, you were a business person, or I should say are a business person.
Recovering.
You own a brew pub, and then you were mayor of Denver and became governor. How did that history as a business owner influence how you governed and what issues you decided to focus on?
And so we had 14 brew pubs and had done a bunch of real estate development, so I had a pretty broad experience, but that seminal experience of starting my own business, of having an idea and going to the library and getting out a book on how to write a business plan, really did inform how I learned business. And so I've been a geologist before that, but my first day as running a big popular restaurant, I knew that I was going to be better at that, and it was really a calling for me. So that lesson of taking care of customers and service, in the restaurant business, when you're in the weeds, if there's a big crowd comes in and you're just trying to catch up, I mean, everybody's family. Everyone's on your team, and whether they're tall or short or black or white, you're all the same. You're all one team. And those lessons, you know, the basic notion in the restaurant business, that there's no profit, there's no margin in having enemies. No matter how crazy or unreasonable that customer is going to be, you'll go out of your way to make sure they leave. At least they know you care about the relationship. You don't see that quite so much in government these days. So there are some lessons like that that I think have served well.
So you both are, so you've now had, 7+ years in your roles as governor. I think people are viewing Washington as less and less able to get things done. You don't necessarily have that luxury at the state level. You have to pass a budget every year and fund education. And have you seen things change during your time in office? And how have you managed sort of having to, you know, being in purple states where you just have to get things done?
Well, are you wondering, did your question mean, have I seen things changed at the national level or because of the national level impacting the state level?
How has it impacted the state? Have you seen any changes in your state?
You know, I find sometimes working with the legislature, and not all of them, of course, but I sometimes find it challenging because there are always pot shots being thrown one way or the other, and I think it's a waste of time. I strongly believe that people from my state want the leaders of our state to succeed. If we don't want them to succeed, then we don't want to succeed. And so whether it be the president or a member of Congress or your governor, you want them to succeed in spite of sometimes of the chaos that may be, you know, around them. I really do pray that our president becomes successful. Why would anybody say, I want him to be unsuccessful, and therefore we're going to take in the consequences? They do the pot shot kind of thing. I think sometimes in the national level, they're not flexible. It's going to be no because it's going to be no because it's going to be no, and they're not going to depart from their party and their opinion. And as I said, as a lawyer, you negotiate, you advocate, you get together, you talk. What can we bring out of this issue that is best for the people you represent? So I do see some of it, but they focus really well on the issues before us. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are combined with some of the federal issues because we have 3 national labs, 4 military bases, and a lot of federal dollars that come into our state. And so they can't get a budget passed. It really impacts us in a much greater way than most states in the country. And so to keep them, you know, on track and making sure they're taking care of their budgets so that we can take care of our budgets is a really big challenge.
Yeah. What have you seen?
Well, we've certainly seen some changes, I think, at every level of social media, right, has, I think, increasingly gotten more vitriolic. A lot of haters. Almost no matter what you do, someone's going to hate it, and they're going to get up there and have their megaphone. We've seen the disintegration of local news coverage. So the Denver Post just announced they're going to lay off another 30% of their reporters a couple weeks ago. This is the 4th layoff they've had of that size or more. So they've decimated the number of people that are doing local news covering. And, you know, you can still get the national news from Google and Facebook, from the New York Times and the Washington Post, but essential to us doing our jobs is we need those local journalists, A, to find out when one of our agencies is doing something wrong or corrupt, mm-hmm. right? And they are an essential, you know, Teddy Roosevelt used to give his business card out to the journalists and say, he'd give his business card and send it over to the Department of Commerce and tell the secretary, give this person total access to our files and our people. Because he knew that if you're going to really try and believe in good government, you have to uncover the bad stuff. A free, you know, and I understand free speech, but that honest, you know, marketplace where newspapers used to compete to get the scoop. We don't have that in the local government. And we also, so much of the news you get on TV used to have local news, you know, every night at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, depending on which channel you watched. And they'd compete to get the local news. Now you end up seeing, I mean, you've got Fox News, you've got MSNBC, you've got CNN, and they're all competing with each other. And I'm a believer in free speech, and I understand capitalism and how that ties into it's always been the case. But their job is to rile people up. I mean, that's how they get ratings. They get people angry and incendiary, and that somehow captures a bigger share of the audience. That's not good for getting collaborative solutions and compromises, you know, accomplished.
Have you had to change at all how you think about reaching your citizens?
Oh, sure. Obviously, you have to do social media now. As the news agency, your local newspapers, your local television stations have diminished in their capacity to reach people, and it's dramatic, right? Certainly with the newspapers, it's over 50, probably it's closer to 70% reduction in who pays attention to them. So a tweet becomes an essential of how you send out a piece of news you think is important, and you make sure it goes to places where it gets retweeted. I mean, there's a whole craft. I won't say a science, but I'll say a craft to how do you utilize those techniques. But it's definitely a new way of thinking about things.
Let's talk about a couple issues that every governor has to face when they're in office. And I know one that you both have worked really hard on is education. I mean, the state government is the most significant funder of education. Governor Martinez, talk about what you saw when you came into office. You made education a significant priority. Talk a little bit about what you saw and what policies you wanted to put in place and where you are now.
I made it I'm very passionate about education of our children, of course, K through 12 initially. And then depending on the student, to have options for not just are they college ready, but instead do they want a certificate or some sort of 2-year institution degree because they don't want to go to college. They need to go to work, but they can go to work with a certificate that gives them the skills to, for example, be a welder or to be driving a large truck with a CDL license that will earn them in New Mexico and southeastern New Mexico $80,000 a year. And so it depends that we have to give them a lot of tracks. The reason I'm so passionate about it is as a prosecutor, I saw the end game. I saw when they walked into a courtroom. I saw when these kids could not read basic, simple English to understand what was happening in the courtroom. It had to be explained to them. It's not that they couldn't understand it. It's just they couldn't read it. And so from the age of from kindergarten to 3rd grade, you learn to read. And then from the 4th grade on, you read to learn for the rest of your life. Well, when a teacher gets student comes in the 5th grade and they read at the 2nd grade level, that's extremely frustrating for that 5th grade teacher. Because what do they do to raise that child at a level where some of the other kids are? Some are at 3rd grade, some are not at 3rd grade. And we have to put an emphasis on reading because that will then make you better at geography, at math, at science, and a variety of other things. So we implemented a bunch of reforms. We came out actually on the ESSA program, Every Student Succeeds Act, under the Obama administration. We were the #1 applicant for that, and what we put forward so that we could teach those kids and advance them, but at the same time we're raising the bar. So we had a very low graduation rate of 63% of our students graduating from high school. So you can imagine in 6th grade, 7th grade, when you're not reading very well, and you're asked to do something in front of the classroom, and you're not doing very well, well, you're going to skip class that day. And if you can't turn in homework because you can't understand the instructions, much less the material, you just stop showing up. And then you end up, many of them, unfortunately, in the courtroom with me. And so you always saw the end game of where they just struggled and there was no one there to identify them. No one there to give them that extra help financially to make sure they have reading coaches, to make sure that the teachers are evaluated. And we want them evaluated not because we want to fire them, but because we want to recognize those that are doing very well, but we also want to recognize who needs some professional development, that we're willing as a state to invest in them. It doesn't come out of their school budget, it comes from a state budget. So they can then handle a classroom that has students at a variety of levels of reading skills, math skills, et cetera. And so when we received that recognition with our ESSA program, we've implemented all. And then we had, as just a quick aside, we had a senator who was at a national conference and spoke out about New Mexico. She was representing New Mexico, and she said, teachers in New Mexico don't know how to teach poor children, which is an appalling statement, that you cannot teach poor children. I lived in a county where I was district attorney. It was the 2nd largest county in the state. Gadsden School District is 100% the students receive a free lunch and a free breakfast. 65% of them, Spanish is their first language. They live in dilapidated housing or government housing. And when I walked in as governor, their graduation rate was 43%. They embraced every bit of our reforms. Last year, they were at 86%, year before last, 86% graduation rate. So what did we do? We raised the bar. And now they're at 81% graduation rate. But you want to raise the bar so that they get better and better what they're doing. So when an elected official has the audacity to say, we don't know how to teach poor children, I point to Gadsden High School or their school district and say, go ask those kids what they've learned and how they're ready to go on to a second level after high school of learning, whether it be certificate or otherwise.
Yeah.
And so I believe strongly that every single child can learn. You just have to be committed to teaching them.
And part of what you did, I think, was you worked on changing the culture and the belief of what kids could do. And I think that was one of your first challenges you had, right?
Absolutely.
It was just a really low level of belief of what could even happen.
Absolutely. You know, I understand that, you know, we got a lot of pushback from unions, but I can work with people who belong to a union because it's about the grown-ups. You know, working conditions, are they getting proper pay? Are the classrooms the size that they can really reach all the children? I understand that part. What we're interested in is the outcome. What happens with a child that is being taught by a union member or non-union member? What is the outcome of that child? Are they learning or are they not learning? And how do we reward those teachers that have made an entire classroom much better because now they are exemplary teachers? We offered $5,000 for every exemplary teacher as a bonus, and an additional $5,000 for them to be exemplary in math. The union said no thank you. The teachers said absolutely. But a member, you know, you have a membership, but 5 people run it. And so I don't think they're really representing the whole.
Yeah.
And that's disappointing because we were ready to go and run with that, and the legislature turned it down.
So Governor Hickenlooper, education has been a big issue for you too. Talk a little bit about what you've been an advocate for in your state and where you've gone.
Absolutely, and what Suzanne is describing, I think every governor embraces that. You've got to have some sort of third grade literacy. You know, if kids can't read by the end of third grade, you've got to get at it right then. That next year, that you've got to get tutoring, whatever it takes. They've got to be able to read. Same thing with math, basic adding, subtraction, division, multiplication. Those years are so precious. We've also looked at some of the innovations that have come through all kinds of different experiments, but like a longer school day, longer school year. My son went to a public school that was an innovation school, and they had a longer school day, longer school year, and the principal negotiated, and the transaction was, because all the kids were going to freak out, right? Instead of 6.5 hours, they're going to have 8 hours and 15 minutes, but it was no homework. So it was 6th, 7th, and 8th grades. You have a longer school day and another 20 days of school, but no homework. And my son was all over that. I mean, he said, I'm in, right? and it changed our relationship. He'd come home and we could shoot baskets or kick a soccer ball, play a game, watch TV, whatever. It was transformative. So those kind of innovations come. I also think we have to start looking at, and for 30 years we've told pretty much every kid they're supposed to graduate from college. And for 30 years, roughly 65 to 70% of our kids, plus or minus a couple percent, but 65 to 70% of our kids are never going to get a 4-year college degree, despite everything we've done. And what we've done is walked away and made all those other kids feel like they're, second class, and reduced resources that we put towards their training at a time when all of a sudden, we need not just electricians and plumbers, but we need technicians and data analysts. They don't have to have a college degree, but they have to have skills. So we're now in our 3rd year of piloting a apprenticeship program that's modeled on what Switzerland does. So kids get to make the choice, but if they want to, let's say when they're 16 or 17, they can decide maybe they're not going to go right away to college, or maybe they might never want to go to college, but they make a decision to go work, and they work 2 days a week, and we have 8 different industries, so healthcare, banking, insurance, finance, these basic aerospace, cybersecurity. They go work 2 days a week, and then they go to a community college for 3 days of classwork that will get them their high school degree from their high school, but also will get them, college credits. They'll end up at their end of their apprenticeship with 60 or 70 units, so almost a year's worth of college. And most importantly, the curriculum that they study in those 3 days of study is designed, some part of it is designed by the industry in which they are working. So if they're working in a bank, they'll get one kind of math. If they're working in an insurance company, they'll get a different kind of math. So they're becoming more successful. The amazing thing about this is businesses love it, even though they're taking on some of the burden of training our kids, and the kids love it, right? Most of them stay living at home, and maybe they're only making $12 an hour, but they end up saving some money. They end up with almost a year's worth of college credit. They want to go in that direction, or they can keep working and get certificates as they go along. And I think, that's kind of the foundation. And then even beyond that, we've got to get, again, 70% of our kids are never going to get a 4-year degree. We've got to encourage them and incentivize them to get skills that will accumulate over their lives. It's got to be continuous learning your whole life. I mean, automation is going to change everything in real time. So we've got to have some technology platforms. We're working with LinkedIn and Microsoft with something called skillful.com that will allow, ultimately, when it's fully built out, allow people to look at all the skills they acquire over the course of the year, course of their life, and then at any time click on a different profession and see what skills they have that would be applicable and what skills they're lacking, where they can get those skills, what it would cost.
Yep.
Because we've got to get ahead. A big part of the problem, this division we have in America between rural and urban, is the fact that we've left so many people behind and haven't given them those, and I think it's, to a certain extent, I don't think it's Republican or Democratic. I think it's the fault of both parties, and I think it's government malpractice, right? How could we have done that?
But Holly, I want to make one point about the statement made by the senator, because if you have the attitude,
got promoted or demoted.
Don't you try to call me a senator? I'm a governor.
That person should be fired. What I think is important is you have an attitude that says you're poor, and there's already a decision made about you that you're not going to succeed.
Right.
That is cheating that child. And we had a bill that we were pushing forward that said it was titled "No Child." It's Jesus, I just went out of my head. It is no social promotion. So if you couldn't read at 3rd grade level and you weren't proficient in 3rd grade, you couldn't be passed on to the 4th.
Right.
So the union, of course, had to exaggerate it, and it became a political issue, saying, oh my God, we're going to have 20,000 3rd graders being held back. And we said there aren't 20,000 3rd graders that exist. And so, get your numbers right at least a little bit. And so we turned around and said, you don't have to hold them back in the 3rd grade. Hold them back in kindergarten. And it's how a parent and a teacher put it to them. We had one of the legislators say, my kid, and dad is like a super duper scientist, brilliant. And he said, son, your teacher needs some help. There's going to be some new kids coming in, and she's going to need your help. And is it okay if you hang back with these students and help them so that everybody can then move on to the next grade? It's how you put it to this child. Instead of saying, well, you're not good enough or whatever it may be.
Right.
And that no social promotion bill never, ever got out of committee, never got onto my desk. And instead, we're promoting kids onto the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th grade without being able to read proficiently in the 3rd grade. And that's a disservice.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about this connection then to your state and your economy. And one of your biggest jobs is making sure you have a great growing economy and jobs. You've got to work on that today, right? But then you also have to think ahead of how do I prepare my students and how do I prepare the state for what's to come in terms of automation, et cetera. How have you tackled that? What have been your biggest challenges in that? You've both been in office a long time and came in sort of while the recession was, you know, sort of starting to get figured out. But you came in at a time where it wasn't easy.
Well, we both got elected in 2010, I think.
Yeah.
And so we came in, and it was
Right.
that was in terms of tax revenues the
Low
bottom.
point.
I mean, it was really the low point. And
Yeah.
Colorado was 40th in job creation. It was a flat out disaster. Our unemployment was, I think, 27th or 28th highest, or 28th lowest in the country. And we did a bottom-up economic development process. We went to all 64 counties and asked each county, and not just the economic development people, but all the civic leaders, elected leaders, what are the jobs, what are the industries you want to see in your county, what can we do to help? And we came back with basically almost all over the state, almost everywhere, we had the same consistent answers. Less bureaucracy and red tape, have government leaner and not so much friction in what it takes to start a business. And to grow a business, more access to capital, more innovation and technology championing. The state has to be more pro-business, and people were very clear, pro-business, but with high standards, high environmental standards, high ethical standards, and we made that a major part of the first 4 years was just to push everything we could to demonstrate that we were going to be as pro-business. We were going to be as pro-business as Texas. and you think about it, if you look at both of our states, we all one time were part of the country of Texas, or large chunks of us.
There's a lot of Texans with homes in Colorado.
Well, we know that too, and we're very appreciative for that. We have low property taxes. I'm sure that's part of the reason. But anyway, that effort to be really attract young people. We tried to really focus on, in Metro Denver now there's 1,000 miles of bike trails, craft beer, of course. And I didn't have just one craft brewery. I had 15 of them. We started in old historic buildings all over the country. And they became rallying points, right? They became a focus of why this was a cool lifestyle for young people. And if you get rid of red tape and bureaucracy and you can attract a lot of young people, you're going to have a strong economy. And I think Texas has seen that. I think New Mexico is beginning to see that. And this last summer, our unemployment got down to 2.3%, which at the time was about the lowest. It's too low because no one can find workers, so everyone stops making capital investments and things kind of slow down. Now we're up to the more reasonable 3%. But still, you have to do a better job training people. Yeah. As you're describing, our biggest challenge right now, we've been attracting so much talent to come fill these jobs. We've got to do a better job of educating. Our University of Colorado and Colorado State University are going to double the numbers of engineers they graduate within a 5-year period. And I think that's got to happen all over the country. And it's got to start. We need more computer science. When kids are in elementary school, they got to get their first exposure to it. Middle school, they got to be able to take a class. One study after another shows that if you give exposure to computer science when a kid's young, they're much more likely to take it again and to ask for it and demand it as they get into high school. And not everyone's got to be a computer coder. But I think in the new generation, almost everyone's going to have to be able to talk about it and understand the basics of it because it's going to be connected to almost every job. Mm-hmm.
Governor Martinez, how have you thought about this issue in Mexico?
There has to be a culture change in higher education, whether it's the 2-year institution, whether it be a certificate or a 4-year degree. And the culture change is, it is the business entity that has to tell the institution what is it that they need from their students when they come out of those institutions, instead of the professors deciding we need more of X or more of Y. It is the other way around, otherwise they're not employable. And we also have created meta majors within the higher education institution, because sometimes our students who go into a 2-year or 4-year aren't quite sure what they want to do. And they end up accumulating 150 or 60 credit hours and don't have half a degree of anything. And so these meta majors end up being a core of classes that will transfer and apply to your to your degree. But it applies to several degrees, 2-year or 4-year institution. You have someone that follows you, that is the person that's actually advocating for you and getting you in the right place. Most of our degrees now in New Mexico, we have 37 different institutions. They are now aligned where English 101 at NMSU is going to apply to UNM English 101 so that it transfers and applies to your degree. And most degrees now are at 120 credit hours. When I had a professor, or not a professor, a president from one of our universities come in and talk to me one day, and I asked him, I said, what is your graduation rate? And it was like in the low 40%. And I said, oh my God, I said, that's a lot of money that's being spent for the output to be 40-some-odd%. He goes, oh no, that's 6 years. That's in a 6-year plan. I said, when did it become 6 years? I thought it was a 4-year degree. And he goes, oh no, that's in the upper teens. That's a lot of money to not have good outputs. And so we've now aligned most of those degrees, one, to respond to the business entity. What do you need? Do you need more engineers? Do you need techs? Some sort of a health tech within the health industry, which is one of our fastest growing industries in New Mexico. Or do you need, here's the curriculum to become a mechanic for the F-16s that exist at Holloman Air Force, because we don't have those military men and women aren't able to work and repair them. But now I have given it to a 2-year institution, and they're going to teach from their curriculum, certify them, and they've got a job coming out. And it may be a 9-month course that they're taking. But having most degrees at 120 hours, less debt, out to work quicker, and you can get an engineering degree in Stanford University for 120 credit hours. And in New Mexico State University, you were getting that at 140 hours. And now it's at 120 hours.
Yeah.
And it is equivalent as far as the content and the material of that engineering degree. And so we're moving people out into the workforce much faster. And we have a quality education that's being given, regardless of what level that student needs it at.
Yeah.
But always it was the professors telling the students or the community, this is what we need. And it really didn't correlate to that, which here comes a whole bunch of Walgreens, and you need pharmacists or pharmaceutical aides. We don't have 200. And now we create the curriculum alongside with Walgreens and then say, all right, now let's do this curriculum and get these people out with those kind of certificates that they need.
Good. So let's turn the tables a little bit. What has been the most unexpected issue you faced as governor, or challenging? Something that you just sort of came out of nowhere that you weren't necessarily, you hadn't campaigned on, you hadn't.
I guess that would have to be pot.
Yeah. Did you say pot?
I mean, you go out of your way you campaign on the economy. For the last 2 years, U.S. News and World Report, Colorado's the #1 economy in America, and all anybody ever wants to talk about. Right? They should be asking, how'd you get Colorado to be the #1 economy in America? Well, want to hear about pot. We were successful in getting so many young people come to Colorado that they decided you talk to kids under 35, and I'm old enough now that I call people under 35 kids. They think there's not that big a difference between beer and pot. They just don't. And so many of them came to Colorado that when that initiative, and I opposed it, almost every elected official I know opposed it, it passed 55-45. And I think my job when something like that happens is I have to be the objective, nonpartisan. I'm going to do everything I can to make this work. And, I didn't want it. I don't like it. Don't want to be in conflict with the federal law. No other state or city or country had ever legalized marijuana. I mean, Amsterdam decriminalized it, but no one ever legalized it. So the taxing, how do you regulate it? We track every single plant that's grown? It was a huge endeavor. And yet in the end, I think a lot of what we were most fearful of hasn't happened, right? We haven't seen a spike in consumption. The only demographic that we've seen clear increases in consumption is senior citizens. I mean, you can answer for me. It could be baby boomers coming home to roost, or it could be the pains and of getting old. But we haven't seen a clear indication of driving while high going high. That increasing. We were very concerned about that. And, you know, I still, when other governors ask me, and I'll bet I've talked to 3/4 of the governors, if they ask, I'll always say, we don't have all the data, and we're still not sure that there might not be unintended consequences. So I say, you know, this is one of the big social experiments of this century. Wait a year, wait 2 years. But obviously there becomes this kind of feeding frenzy. People come to me and say, well, what about that tax revenue? Well, Colorado's a $30 billion a year budget when you add everything in. And last year we made $220 million on pot taxes. I mean, it's a drop in the bucket. It's not going to pay for, you know, early childhood education for every 4-year-old. It doesn't fill those kinds of gaps. It does get us money for, you know, supportive housing and wraparound for people who have drug problems. It does allow us to market. We spend $8 million a year marketing to teenagers that, you know, while your brain is growing so rapidly, there's a high probability that you'll lose some sliver of your long-term memory if even just once a week taking this high THC marijuana. We push that out and we market it to them, to their parents, to their trusted adults, their coaches, their clergy, their teachers. We wouldn't have had, I mean, it's hard to get money for that unless you have something like the tax money. So, you know, I'm cautiously optimistic. Like the old system was a train wreck, and there's still lots of problems. Someone said, you know, we have 50, maybe $75 billion black market. People are illegally growing pot and then shipping it up to New Mexico or out to Oklahoma. So we just put another $12 million into, you know, supporting our police. And they said, well, you still got a $50, $70 million black market. What I say was, you know, 10 years ago, it was all black market, right? It's a $1.5 billion industry in Colorado, and it was all legal, and it was all being shipped everywhere. And any kid who wanted it could get marijuana at their school. I mean, whether we like it or not, that's the reality.
So, Governor Martinez, what's been most unexpected for you in your time in office?
And I'll just make one comment first, if I may, in reference to pot. As a prosecutor for 25 years and lived on the border the entire time. It is a cash industry, and I think the underground, what was that the term you were using for not licensed?
Called the gray market, yeah.
The black market, gray market. Right. They will become a legitimate market when you deal with cash and when you can have people who have lost the income that comes with marijuana that take over the market. And with cash, how do you track that down? But one of the biggest...
But it always was a cash market, right? So there's no difference. It's part of it's still a cash market.
But they had to pay taxes in one, and other one.
Now they pay taxes.
Right. You think?
That's a difference. Well, we know that on $1.5 billion they pay taxes because we put the money in our account.
Yeah. I'm very opposed to it. I'm extremely... we have medical marijuana, and we are supportive of that, and it's very carefully monitored. But going to one of the things that surprised me the most, I campaigned for 16 months, and I talked a lot about, we had a deficit, the largest structural deficit in the history of New Mexico. And actually, it was given one figure, a $250 million deficit. Keep in mind, our budget's only $5.9 billion. Our population is just a little over 200,000, almost 2.1 million people. And so when you have a 250, we thought that was pretty heavy. I got elected. The very next day, it doubled. And so structural deficit I have to fix, no reserves whatsoever, and 16 months of telling people we can fix this if we learn to live within our means, if we have the number of people in government to actually provide the services that we are supposed to provide. So what is our mission? Are we within that mission? And are we doing it well with the appropriate number of people? And so the very first thing is that I had a visit by a senior legislator, and he came into my office, and it was darling, you know, just raise the taxes, and let's just go on. It's the way things go. And I was appalled. I said, you've been to my events. You've heard what I've said. I'm not going to raise taxes. There is time for us to trim because there's a lot of fat. And I'll be real honest, there was a lot of corruption in the previous administration that was recognized on the news by FBI agents. And so there was a lot of cleaning up that needed to be done. We did it. We balanced it. We didn't raise taxes. I'm finishing up, well, I'm on my 8th year now. We haven't raised taxes. We've cut taxes 39 different times in a bipartisan way, because there's always been a majority of Democrats. So we did it in a bipartisan way. So if you take the cutting of taxes and the cutting of fees, 59 different times we've made it less expensive for people to live and work there, and more attractive for businesses to look at our state and say, we should go there. We have actually beat out Texas several times on some very big projects because our portfolio is more attractive. And so to hear a leader telling me, that was campaigning, this is governing, so now govern. And I said, this is a difference between being a politician and being a leader. And I don't want to be a politician. I want to be a leader and someone who fights really hard to keep their word, to make sure that there is some confidence by not only the people who live there, but also in companies and businesses who are looking at our state, that you can balance your budget, and you can do so without digging into the pockets of those corporations, small businesses, or the families. And we've accomplished it. And I think that's one of my greatest accomplishments.